Okay, that stress testing now has become an integral part of almost every bank, and even a lot of principles and all have come out in terms of implementing proper stress testing practices across the various banks. And as a part of even Basel, they have come out with mechanisms for good stress testing. As we have seen, even the DPG derivatives all policy group, they have come out with 9 different areas on which the one variable frameworks need to be implemented. So, like that, they have come out with various principles. One for what kind of stress testing needs to be done and how it needs to be supervised. So, this is actually a very good article, and that has been directly put up into this syllabus. Right, I think this article was written again during the recession times itself. So that was brought into our scenario, into our syllabus scenario. So stress testing as a tool is primarily for identifying. It's more used by the banks because extreme scenario, how much they can lose, and do they have the real backup if that such kind of a loss occurs. For a bank, that's a very key thing. Otherwise, they are going to shut down their business. So that's where we are doing stress testing on a bank, where the role is to identify the risk, that extreme risk, assess them, which means how much loss can come out because of that. Then, based on that, implement a risk mitigation plan or management plan, monitor the risk and manage the risk. So that's a typical risk management process, and stress testing is also trying to address that process itself. And the recent financial turmoil has actually increased the need for good stress testing practices, because that's an extreme event. As you said, why these the risk management is not able to identify or reduce this risk. This extreme risk, people have not spent as much of time and effort in terms of reacting to these, or making sure that they have the necessary backup to address these extreme risks. If that is the case, they would have very much altered the portfolio. They would not have gone into such a kind of subprime lendings. All would have been possible if that much of risk management based on a stress testing has been implemented. So for that means there should be some kind of a regulatory or monitoring authority. Apart from just using this concept, there should be some kind of a monitoring authority which will forcibly implement these, or make the banks implement these kind of processes. So what were the areas where it lagged during the recession phase was involvement of the board and senior management. The moment you circulate this idea of stress testing and say, oh, in this extreme condition we'll lose up to this much, so we need to have a backup for this much, they'll not buy that idea. This occurs only, there is only 0.5% chance of this occurring. Why should I be bothered about this? But 0.5% chance is still there. If it occurs, that's what has happened. So the involvement of the board and senior management in this process was a big weakness before the financial crisis. So that's where today a lot of these financial institutions and banks today are even creating a role called a CRO, Chief Risk Officer. So they have understood the need for risk management to that level. And even a full organizational picture, having a big picture on how much loss can come to the entire organization because of this extreme risk, and the different tools and models available for doing this extreme risk, and having a mechanism of addressing that or responding to that. These all were not typically there with the companies before the financial crisis. So that's where the recommendations have come out, that it should not be done as a separate exercise. It should be done as an organization as a whole. It should not be said that risk is this person's job. It should be more of an integrated exercise of the entire organization. It should be a culture rather than it's a task of one particular group in a company. So the stress testing forms an essential ingredient of the overall risk management plan. So mandatorily you do a stress testing, use multiple perspectives for doing it based on various risk elements, come out with the entire documentation for that and recommendations, and look at it as the company wise or even a market wise kind of an enhanced scenario in that. So I mean, how to implement it within the organization requires right from an acceptance level within the management and the whole company, developing that kind of a culture towards mitigating and managing risk. So this is where the areas of improvement again talking about. So earlier the stress testing mechanisms that were used, they did not have proper tools, models for developing the proper stress testing scenarios. So now the focus has gone more and more. Even a lot of FRMs are recruited for the purpose of developing these kind of tools and models also within the companies. And so that's where the recommendations for improving all these, what all procedures need to be used for solid stress testing and all, they are getting developed post this financial turmoil area. So which means today's stress testing is becoming a very much an integral part within the organization. Earlier it lacked even the depth and the breadth. Most of the tests people were doing are on minor differences. Okay, interest rates going up by 5.5% or going down by 0.5%. They never looked at 1% change. Or even today, even if I see the mergers and acquisitions, only big companies are getting acquired. Small company acquisitions today no more exists. Or even if they are existing, they are not hitting the news. Every time a big company wants to acquire another big company, probably its competitor, not a small player. So if that's the case, it's an extreme risk event. So I need to have a mechanism to model all those things, not mild shocks. I need to give very severe shocks. Right? So coming out with an improved processes, earlier only smaller correlation effect. Okay, what if the correlation goes from 0.5 to 0.3, but it may go to 0.9 or it may go to minus 0.5. So giving those kind of shocks and all, earlier stress testing was not that that robust. But now we are even the tools and all are coming out, because if this changes, its impact somewhere else changes and overall number changes. So which means it's a complete model. It's a complete model. So developing those kind of models, creating a kind of dependency analysis is what is the root for a proper stress testing mechanism in any organization. So recommendations wise, use complex, earlier the lot of companies were using very complex structured products like your credit default swaps. There are a lot of even the derivatives wise, creating a lot of complex products out of the derivatives. Now if I am creating a complex product, it's a combination of 4 or 5 different products. The risk in each of the products is different. So I need to understand the risk of each of these products, each of the individual components, see the kind of correlation that can exist between each of these components, and then arrive at the overall risk out of this integrated product. That's a typical mechanism to go with. So the mechanism to do this kind of stuff earlier was not existing, because individually they found out, but as a whole, taking into consideration their interdependencies and all, that complex structured products, their risks were not evaluated to the extreme extent. So that's where the nature, magnitude are different from regular products, because the moment you combine them, their risk pattern is not a additive of all the individual components. Addition of all the individual components, it's not the case, because there could be a lot of correlation issues between them, which could result in the risk level of the aggregate much different from the risk level of the individual parts. So the testing has to happen to that level. So similarly, there could be a wrong way risk. So the probability of default of a counterparty because of the adverse general market conditions. The moment the market goes down, we are only thinking of the normal stress testing, what it used to do. Okay, if the market is going down, probably because the stock price has gone down by this much extent, my loss will be up to this much, right? Because I have invested, let's say, I have bought 100 shares of a company, right? If the share price can go down by 2%, so my overall portfolio will go down by this much extent. My loss is by this much extent. So prevent this loss by taking some derivative. That's a typical risk management. But in this process, what has been ignored is, if the share price goes down, probably people may default on my loan. Because people have faced the loss, right? So now there are probably people have faced the loss. So they are not getting that much of amount to pay the loan. They may default on the loan, which means because of stock price going down, it's just not my loss in the investments, but I have to look at the default that is happening on the loan which I have given. Let's say I am a money lender, right? Money lender, and I have invested in the stock market. Stock price has gone down of some company. Okay, my portfolio is going down on one side. So to prevent that loss, I may take a derivative. Let's say I would have bought a put option or something to mitigate that loss. But what I have missed out in this process is, if the stock price goes down, probably for the other person also it's a loss. The person who has borrowed from me, he has also invested heavily in the same stock. He will lose a very considerable amount, which means because of that loss, there is a good chance that he will stop paying me the loan amount because he is in a loss, right? I may or may not be able to get. So it's just not the market risk for me there. That market down is resulting even into a credit risk. So that is what we are calling as a wrong way risk, where the contagion effect of the impact of one of the risks on the other needs to be looked at in simultaneous. And there could be a possibility of basis risk. Basis risk we even talked about, especially with the spot future price differing from the future spot price. So there is always a change, and that could so there are case studies where we have seen, just because of a small drop in the oil prices or something, they have closed down metallurgical shaft, or even the case of the National Australian Bank. They have actually closed down their businesses just with a small change, which means for them the stress testing at that level was very much required. If the oil price drops by 1 rupee or $1, their portfolio position has gone down by $300 million because of the position they have holding. So for us, if the oil price drops by $1, probably if I have bought only 10 liters of oil, I might be losing only $10. Whereas they have got into a contract of 300 million barrels of oil. So the loss was anything less than $300 million. Right? So stress testing is really required from that perspective, which will really give you an indication of how much of your money is at risk, and you can take your action accordingly. And there is a possibility of the pipeline risk. Yeah, I have so many assets. Let's say these are all my assets. Now, I may not be in a position to sell all these assets. Because I am not able to sell them, I'll still keep them in my balance sheet just as they are. Which means they are in a pipeline to be sold, but I am not able to sell them. So I am still keeping them on my balance sheet. They are not doing anything good for me, but they are still lying on my balance sheet because I am not able to gain anything out. I am not able to sell them off. So such kind of risk that is existing where my assets are still parked in my balance sheet because I am not able to dispose them, I am calling that as a pipeline risk. So testing all these kind of scenarios is very much required as a part of your stress testing practice. Even the contingent risk. So typically most of the banks and all, they are providing the credit to off balance sheet SPAs, which are more like, let's say, GMR holdings. For the purpose of GMR Hyderabad Airport, they create a special purpose company. And the loans are given only to that company, not to GMR. Right? So, what typically happens is, the contractual agreements and all, based on that, they are giving the loan to that new company which was floated exclusively for GMR Hyderabad Airport, not with GMR. Now what is happening? There is a contingency risk. What if the project does not get completed on time? What if a few other things come up exclusive to that project? All these are contributing to the contingent risk. So the bank need to have proper backup mechanism if this project gets halted. Because most of the banks are giving heavy loans for these kind of infrastructure projects. Right? And there is a big contingency risk associated with them. So the banks need to have a proper mechanism, which means what if this entire project bursts out? I may lose up to 1,000 crores. How will it impact me? These are all the common stress testing. And even the funding risk. Liquidity risk, how will I get it funded? Right? Today I have a short cash flow crisis. Is there any mechanism I can typically raise in the short term? And will I get a better deal by raising a short term loan? Or even that would even worsen my situation. So those kind of things need to be tested as a part of the common stress testing practices. So this chapter was primarily focusing on the recommendations which have been given by the supervisory group in terms of in which areas you can actually come out with proper stress testing practices within the organization.